name is Charlene Spaller, and I'm going to share with you the end of my great-grandmother's life. The reason this event is important to me is because it really shows how fragile and fleeting life can be as someone takes their last breath. She was 92 years old. She was a very vibrant woman. She lived alone, took care of herself. She had relatively few medical problems, and she was very sound of mind, and she developed a case of the shingles, and she ended up in the hospital for treatment. And once she had her treatment for the shingles, she was then moved to a transitional care center. She'd really initially wanted to go home, but that was not medically an option at that time. And while she was at the transitional care center, she began to have many strokes, and that put her in the hospital a second time. And it was during that second stay that she began to deteriorate pretty rapidly, and she would not eat and she would not drink, and they had to bring in and put her on IV fluids, and the medical staff talked about putting in a feeding tube. And at this point she wouldn't speak except to refuse the feeding tube and to ask to go home. And between the doctors and the family, they decided to go ahead and let her refuse the feeding tube, and hospice was called in. They removed her fluids, and they transported her to my aunt's home by ambulance. And it was there that the family all gathered and waited. The doctors had said it would take about 1 to 2 days for her to pass, but unfortunately it took 5 very long, emotionally driven days for that to happen, with family watching and waiting and taking care of her, and hospice checking in, and we had to give her medications and make sure she was taken care of at all times. So family was always there with her. And when the time finally did come for her to pass, and the family gathered around her bed and she drew her last breath, it was still pretty devastating. Even though that was the moment we'd all been waiting for, it was still pretty shocking to see the life leave out of someone that you love like that. I'd had many other relatives pass, but I'd never been there while it happened, and it was a pretty difficult situation. But I was both sad and relieved that she was not in pain anymore. And this was a hard time for me, and it wasn't that much long after that happened I found out that I was pregnant and that my husband and I were going to have our first child. And upon bringing that life into the world, it helped ease the pain of losing my great-grandmother and seeing her life go, even though I knew that she lived a long and full life. And that is all I have to share today. Thank you.